All right, we're moving on to part 2 of our reptile notes. And um, when we look at the reptiles, we're looking at all these similarities or things that they have in common. So they have a lot of special adaptations for life on land that amphibians did not have. So the first one we just talked about, the amniotic eggs, they have watertight scales. And this is really important because now they can live on land. They don't have to rely on living in water to conserve water. They have one occipital condyle, so there's one point of attachment with the skull, and this allows them to turn their head, shake their head, much more movement. They have kidneys that are going to help them conserve water. They now have a three-chambered heart, and there's a little bit more separation, and later in the notes I'll show you the diagrams where they're almost completely divided. Crocodiles have four chambers. So their heart is a little bit more advanced than some of the other reptiles. They do have claws for digging and for locomotion. They have an improved respiratory system. They don't have a lateral line on them anymore like the fish and some amphibians because they don't live in water. They don't need it. And there are about 17 orders of reptiles, but only members of 4 of those orders are alive today. And those are the 4 orders that we'll talk about in the notes later on. Here's a diagram just showing the watertight scales and how they overlap each other to help conserve water in their bodies. The skin has no respiratory function, so for amphibians they could have gas exchange through their skin, but reptiles cannot. What the scales function in a reptile is to just prevent water loss. It is very thick. If you've ever touched any kind of reptile, you can feel that they're pretty thick. It's good for protection, and they don't have as many glands secreting things as amphibians did. And the thing is with reptiles, they do have to shed their outer layer, and this is called ecdysis. And I'm sure you've seen them. Last year I had a snake skin from one of Mrs. Johnson's snakes. It was an almost fully complete snake skin, and then I think one of my 9th graders was playing with it and it broke. But periodically her snakes will shed their skin. Their skeletons, they have skulls that are larger than amphibians, and they have a plate of bone called the secondary palate that separates their nasal and their mouth passages. And that's important as far as when they're eating and breathing, they can kind of do both now. They do have the atlas and the axis, like we said, for more head movement. And their limbs extend laterally, which like out to the side of them. They're not underneath them like they are in mammals, but it does provide them more movement on land. And then there are some reptiles, the primitive types that were bipedal, meaning they walked on 2 legs. And there's a good diagram or picture here showing this monitor standing up on 2 legs, and it's more of a threat display. He looks bigger and scarier when he's standing up like that. So I don't know that I would want to be as close as that gentleman is because these guys do bite. All right, nutrition and digestion. These guys have a wide variety of adaptations for different types of food sources. So we will find herbivores, omnivores, carnivores in this particular class. Turtles do not have teeth, but they have a beak that helps them to eat. And then lizards have adaptations. Some of their tongues are movable for prey capture. You can see a really cool one there in the bottom left picture where he's grabbing a cricket. Most tongues in the lizards are not protrusable, able to stick them out like that, but a few of them have that adaptation. For circulation, reptiles in general are about twice the size of amphibians, so they have to push blood farther and under higher pressure. And if you think about distance, that picture there at the top is a picture of the Brachiosaurus. Very, very large animal. He had to be able to pump blood 6 meters from his heart to his head. And if you think about 6 meters, the width of my classroom is 6 meters. So at the front, from the door to my smartboard, that's 6 meters across. That's how far his heart had to pump blood. That's pretty far. Most reptilian hearts have 3 chambers, and you can see that here. It's got 3 chambers. There's a little bit of mixed blood, oxygenated and deoxygenated, and they colored that purplish in this picture because the right and the left sides of the heart are not completely separated. There's a partial septum, but some of the blood can still mix. And this just showing you a comparison. Amphibian hearts, they have the 3 chambers that are not separated in any way. And then you look at turtles, and their ventricles do have a septum. It's a partial septum. So there is some mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. And then if you look at birds and mammals, they have 4 separate chambers. So there is no mixing of blood. And birds and mammals have the most efficient circulatory system, and that allows them to have even more locomotion and more wide variety of habitats. There's incomplete separation, like I said, of the blood. Some of the blood will go from pulmonary to the systemic circuit. But there's an advantage to this because the reptiles don't have to be breathing constantly because their blood is mixed. Crocodiles, though, do have the complete separation. They're a little bit, even though they're a very primitive creature, they do have a more advanced heart. And here's just showing you the 4 groups of reptiles, and you can see the differences in their flow patterns and the separations in their hearts. Respiration. Mammals, like us, we have a diaphragm that's a muscle that pulls down on the space in the chest cavity, and it makes your lungs fill up. But reptiles don't have a diaphragm, so they have negative pressure breathing. They will pull air into their lungs by increasing their body cavity with their muscles. So they, like if you were to push your stomach out, that's kind of essentially what they're doing to bring air in. Turtles, unfortunately, cannot easily do this. Their ribs don't expand because they're stuck in a shell. So if you watch a turtle breathe, if you look by the sides of their legs or by their neck, you can see their skin kind of moving in and out, and that's kind of how they're able to breathe. That's where they pull air in, like by pushing that skin out the sides, because their shell is not flexible. Reptile lungs do not have alveoli, those little clusters, but they do have a lot of folds in their lungs for surface area for gas exchange. Temperature regulation, they're considered cold-blooded. The more proper term would be ectothermic because they have to receive temperature, or they take on the temperature of their environment. They have to learn how to thermoregulate through behavior. So if they're cold, they need to go bask in the heat. If they're too hot, they need to go where it's colder. Sometimes, depending on the environment they live in, they have to go into hibernation. And they can enter a state of torpor where it's where they have a reduced activity and their metabolism drops. A lot of these guys will hibernate together in groups, and it's called a hibernaculum. A lot of snakes do this. They'll kind of be all in one big snake pile. So just be careful when you're digging around in the fall, or in the spring rather, and you don't come across a big snake pile. It'd be kind of creepy. All right, nervous system and sensory functions. So many of the reptiles have binocular vision, and it's like our vision. We are able to see depth with our 2 eyes. Some of these reptiles have a parietal or a pineal eye that's kind of in the center of their forehead, and that's what you see in that top diagram. It helps them to collect light. Some of them are advanced enough that they can even take in images, and it helps them relay information to their forebrain. They believe that helps to deal with, the amount of daylight and controlling circadian rhythms and biorhythms. Some reptiles have a tympanic membrane and hear airborne sounds. Snakes lack middle ears, and they sense vibrations through their jaw instead. Some reptiles have blind pouches, like they just kind of like a pouch in the roof of their mouth. It's called a Jacobson's organ, and you can see the image here with the snakes will stick their tongue out. They kind of collect chemicals on their tongue, and then when they bring their tongue in, they stick it up into that Jacobson's organ, and it's kind of a mixture between taste and smell. They can collect chemical, environmental information that way, and it relays directly to their brain. For excretion and osmoregulation, osmoregulation is the balance of water. So most reptiles have kidneys that help them conserve water. Most reptiles will produce uric acid, and if you think way back to the beginning of the year, uric acid is the least toxic form of waste because they are land animals and they store it for quite a while, and it's excreted as like a thick paste. If you've ever watched a bird poop out of the air, and it splats on the ground, that is uric acid. And reptiles have a very similar looking waste. Uric acid is non-toxic, so it's okay that it collects in the eggs for the babies because it won't poison them. And marine reptiles, the ones that live in the ocean or near the ocean, have to have salt glands so that they can get rid of excess salt. Otherwise, they would lose too much water from their bodies. And then we talk about reproduction. Reptiles develop in an amniotic egg. They are fully terrestrial. Reptiles are dioecious, meaning they have male genders and female genders. They have internal fertilization with copulation. And by copulation, I mean that the males deposit sperm inside the females. The sperm, interestingly, can be stored for years with some of the female species. So the sperm are actually well protected inside these females' bodies. And there are some lizards and snakes that are parthenogenic. What that means is there's, like in this picture here, there's some species where the entire population is just female. And what they can do is they have a way of reproducing asexually. They can lay unfertilized eggs that develop into more females. It's definite bonus when you don't have a large population or a lot of interaction with other members of the population, because then they don't have to go looking for mates. There are some species that the eggs are not gender specific, but then depending on the temperature that the eggs are kind of incubated at, they kind of become either male or female that way. So it's a very interesting way that their genetics work, that they can have these different nuances that mammals don't have. Mating usually involves elaborate courtship behavior. I do have a lot of video clips, and I did not put them in these PowerPoint notes just because it would take much longer for you to get through the notes. There is a benefit to you watching the videos, but I'm not testing from things out of the videos. But one of them is alligators and their courtship behaviors, and it's this really weird thing that they do in the water where they like vibrate the water, and it looks like a sauna essentially, or all these bubbles and stuff. And then the females, they do make nests and they protect their eggs. So you should take a look at the videos when you do have time. This is the end of part 2, so you can take a break and move on to part 3 after you're ready.